Hi, everyone. I'm Barrie Friedland. I'm here with Jacob Kravetz, and we are so excited today to have our DSOT chat with David DiMaria, who is an organizer with the IAM Union. And we're going to bring him on, and we want him to tell us all about his union, what those initials stand for, tell about the union. It's a very diverse and effective union. So welcome, David.
Hi, Barry. Hi, Jacob. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate us doing this. Um, yeah, I guess like to understand more about our union, quick kind of like history of it. It actually started back in, I got the year wrong, but like 1888, 1887, with 19 railway engineers in Atlanta. So it was born out of the railroads, and we've been around since. And since those early days, have just kind of expanded to other industries. So, still doing railroad work, um, aerospace, airlines, um, manufacturing, kind of all that classic stuff that you think of, with an American union, but also stuff you normally wouldn't think of as union. So. Uber drivers in New York and now expanding in other parts of the country, Nestle workers, IKEA workers. I work with architects mainly in New York City. We represent, the people who make milk bones, the people who literally print the money at the U.S. Mint. So we're a very diverse union by trade, and we have about 600,000 active and retired members, both the U.S. and Canada, and kind of the territories scattered around.
So within that sort of broad umbrella of different types of workers, what would you say and how would you describe sort of the through line around what ties this particular union together?
Yeah, so I think we have, all work is skilled, and we have a lot of highly skilled workers in our union. And so part of what our job is to figure out how does what they put into their work come out on the other end in a way that's fair and coherent, and like their training, their skills, the time, to make sure that they're getting just a fair share of the pie for what they're delivering, for what they do. So that could be, highly skilled technical workers who are contracting with NASA to, somebody working on Harley Davidsons. It's the same point as any other union. Is just through collective power, making sure that the person doing the work is fairly compensated and has protections, has dignity and respect on the job. It's not just about money. A lot of the folks who reach out to us, they could be making decent money, but they want to have time with their family. They want to be able to, go to that baseball game or that soccer game on the weekend and not be forced into overtime. It's really all about just having a say in those conditions in the workplace.
And would it be safety environment as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you don't come home from work, what's it all worth?
So great points. So you represent, as you were saying, everyone from Harley Davidson to, the U.S. Treasury, I guess, printing money to, NASA workers and aerospace engineers. Um, in back in 2013, as I was looking into the union, it looks like you tried to represent Amazon workers, and we actually have had some experience with working with the former head of the Amazon labor union, Chris Smalls. Uh, and I was just wondering, it doesn't seem like that, historically, Amazon has been a very tough nut to crack in terms of union sort of representation. I was wondering if you could talk at all, or if you knew about what had sort of happened back in 2013 and what lessons were taken from there in terms of how to, organize as you sort of expand, into some of these behemoth corporations.
Yeah, so I've only been on with the IAM maybe since like 2017, 2018. So that stuff's before my time. But I think all that stuff resonates, and even the experience here. I'm in New Jersey, just literally across the bridge from Staten Island, where the organizing took place and where they had the victory. Um, workers face an uphill battle. So even if you can organize, right, let's say you get across
Mhm.
that gauntlet, get through that Byzantine set of rules of what it means to have a union election in the United States, getting to that first contract is very, very difficult. And I think it just underlines that we desperately need labor law reform in this country because the rules are stacked against workers. And really, they've been whittled away ever since the National Labor Relations Act was passed back in the way before my time, 30s, 40s, when most of that stuff came about.
Yeah, but Taft-Hartley and
Yeah, and so the laws
1947, I
don't
believe.
have major consequences for employers if they delay, if they break the law. And I think, what a lot of, I would probably every union in the US is supporting is the PRO Act, which you've probably heard of.
Yes.
It's just it's a major kind of rebalancing of the power and the way the laws are set and who they support and who they don't support in this country.
I first of all, we always talk to people that we admire. Maybe one day we'll get adversaries, but what unions have done for this country is immeasurable. And even people, occasionally we write emails every week, and occasionally, like on Labor Day, we write about all the things, not all, that unions have given this country. And in the last 5 years, the Gallup poll, unions have close to 70% approval rating.
Yeah.
And it's even higher among people 18 to 34. So people coming up. And so we've got to find a way to fight a government that is suppressing, that is not enforcing rules. Because when we talked to Chris Smalls, they got the contractor, but management wouldn't sit down with them. They couldn't collect dues. So is it hard having a union with so many members working for the federal government to take adversarial stands?
Yeah, I mean, in my own personal organizing here in New York, we don't go through the board anymore, right? The process is stacked against us. So why would we voluntarily go to a process, go to the labor board, schedule an election, give the employer months to run an anti-union campaign? It's not against the law to lie, right? They could lie, say all sorts of things. And if they can change your mind on that voting day, then it doesn't matter what happens the next day. They can, not follow through with the promises. They can make things worse. And so we just made the conscious decision that we're not going to keep going through that process because it doesn't work. So now most of our campaigns, we're either pushing for voluntary recognition or card check neutrality agreements. At the end of the day, it's all organizing, right? So our thought is, why organize somebody into something that is so stacked against you? Like, let's organize people to where their real power is. And we don't have to go that way. So let's not go that way unless it's absolutely necessary. So I think, my experience, and I've been both an organizer and negotiator for a little over 20 years now, is that there's always a different way to do something if you have power, if you have leverage. And that's, what we always try to think about, at least in the Eastern Territory. We do a lot of non-traditional organizing. And so we're always thinking about what are we actually organizing people into, and to what direction and to what end. And so for us, it means avoid the government as much as you can, at least right now. Like, we had a very pro-labor administration with the last administration, but this one obviously is not pro-labor by any stretch of the imagination. So if we don't need them, we don't need them.
Yeah, I was going to ask about how, because when we talked with Chris Smalls, he was saying that he was very fearful that Trump would end up being elected, and that would slam the door for a lot of avenues for sort of at least formal recognition around unions, as you were at least alluding to. So have you sort of seen all of that develop? What is functionally the difference between what organizing looked like under, say, Biden or maybe Trump 1.0 versus this most recent administration? Or are there major differences strategically?
Yeah, I think at the national level, there's definitely differences. At the regional level, just because of the way the board is organized, things are a lot slower, and it's not. It is a political problem, but it's mostly, from my understanding, due to underfunding, right? So they don't have the funding. They're low on staff. A lot of people left when Doge made the first rounds. FMCS got obliterated. But on the regional level, things are still moving slowly, and we still get good decisions on the regional level. We actually have the board is taking up a case against a very large multinational architecture firm for retaliation. It's a pretty big case, and I believe that's going to be in June. And it's something where we filed the charges, board investigated, found merit, and it's akin to like a federal indictment. So now the board is going to be putting on the case against this company in DC to say they violated the law, they retaliated against workers who are trying to organize. But I think regardless of the administration, just the setup of way union elections work, if you think about it, is stacked against workers. So unless we change that, I think for me personally, in my local level organizing, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, right? Like think about an election that's supposed to be free and fair. Think of like a small country where everyone is paid by the entity in which you're trying to claim power from, right? So it's inherently not fair because the power is completely outsized. You're voting on the employer's premises, right? Where they get to interject, right? Before you go to vote, they get to tell you why you shouldn't be exercising these rights, how it could be bad for the business and therefore, be bad for your family. And so there's no real, it's not a democratic election when the power is that imbalanced. And so, seeing something like similar to a lot of the Canadian provinces, card check. If employees want a union and they sign up for a union, they should be able to have a union because it's their say, not the employer's say. The employer should not be involved in that decision at all. So yeah, like long answer to your question, but not a lot of differences on the ground to ground, the door to door organizing. I think once things get to the national level, that's where no one really wants to take a case to the national board because you wouldn't expect a good decision. And the problem with a lot of this stuff is you have a sympathetic administration. They will pass opinions and rulings that are beneficial, and then the next administration comes in and they'll reverse them all. And so it's kind of this like ping pong thing where like I think it's just the whole thing needs to be overhauled, and we're putting energy into it. I think is the wrong path. I think we just need to change it.
Well, and there's the Apple store in Towson, Maryland,
Yeah.
who got a union. Isn't that your?
Yeah, I was the lead organizer on that, and we spent a very long time just doing education, training, preparing behind the scenes before the public ever heard of anything. For a year, we were getting our stuff together, our strategy together, building solidarity, building our networks, and they were able to do it. But they're one of those groups that they had extremely capable leadership, extremely intelligent leadership in the rank and file, emotionally intelligent. Just one of the best groups I ever worked with in terms of just a bunch of natural leaders who really just took everything in, understood it, and were able to become organizers themselves. And I'd say it shouldn't be that hard. What they went through, other workers should not have to go through because it was probably the most traumatic organizing campaign I'd ever seen. The amount of pressure they got on a daily basis, the different forms of pressure they got, all from a company that is trying to portray this progressive, forward-thinking kind of image. That was not the case inside those stores for those workers.
Can you lay out what some of that, what do they say? What types of pressure techniques do they use on workers? And are those techniques changing over time, or people, how does the environment just sort of the material environment on the ground change sort of people's response to these sort of tactics?
Yeah, what I saw with the Apple campaign is, in generally with an anti-union campaign, a consultant is hired. They may or may not be a lawyer, and they'll kind of have talking points and a script and things they'll throw out, and they may throw out 100 different things that are meant to scare people, and they see what sticks, and then they'll kind of run with it. On the Apple campaign, it was really tailored personally for each individual who worked there. Meaning they had the general message stuff, but also there was a plan for every individual who worked there. And they would be pulled out of the store, right, and walk down the halls of Towson Mall. And whoever the person in management was tasked to talk to that worker would have a specific script or intention to that conversation. Hey, Dave, you know how your grandmother passed away last year and you ran out of time, but we kind of looked the other way. Like, if a union comes in, we can't really do that anymore. We got to treat everyone the same. And, if you're out of time, we're going to have to fire you. Like things like that, where they really tailored their message individually to each person in the store. They also had limitless resources to do that. So like they could hire multiple consultants who could sit there all day and come up with a plan to kind of dismantle the solidarity we were trying to build.
Well, the
Did
proof is in the
you
pudding.
did they find? Go,
Oh,
Barrie.
proof is in the pudding because only one other Apple store after that was able to unionize.
Yep.
Everything is just stuck.
Yep.
And I just want to
I
say
mean,
we have allies all over the country and abroad. Towson, Maryland is a suburb outside of Baltimore City. Go ahead, Jacob.
yeah. So yeah, right in our backyard. It's just occurring to me that this sort of customization, and sort of really drilling down that yes, Apple has this, has unlimited resources, and so perhaps they're some of the first to be able to do this. But I'm beginning to wonder, like, are things these AI tools and things like that? Could you take large, the sort of employee information that you have and much more easily use this in order to take advantage of sort of this customization, of employees, sort of like how you can tailor propaganda to
Yeah.
each individual person based upon sort of the profiles that you of data that you've collected on them over time. Is this a new strategy of customization? Are you noting? Do you have any idea as to whether it's whether it's AI driven or is it just consultancy driven?
Yeah, that I don't know, but I think as you have more resources, you have the ability to customize more, like, and target individually. And
Mhm.
I had never even thought of AI as a tool to do that. But yeah, it's truly frightening that surveillance, AI, lack of any kind of real penalties for doing things like that. Um, that's where we'll keep heading unless we actually reform the system and reform it in a way that's meaningful.
Plus, people get fired. I mean, people trying to unionize get
Yeah.
fired.
Yeah, happens every day, and very rarely do you have the evidence to prove it, right? And going back to the Snowhetta case, this is a case where we actually have the evidence, right? So we have emails where the management is kind of, you can see the thinking, you can see the intention, and it's there in black and white. And so most cases aren't like this, where it's just cold hard facts, like we can prove what they did and why they did it.
They
And so
put they put it in an email.
Yeah, they basically they had an email system which anyone could read anyone's email, and so employees had access to what typically would be private emails of management. So like tracking workers, them kind of having their score sheets of who they think's going to vote yes, vote no, talking about cleaning house once the union effort's over, all that sort of stuff. So. We'll see how it shakes out. It's still, they have to go to trial. They may settle beforehand, but so far they haven't. But the government's going to be putting on the case that they made these violations. And, at the end of the day, if they're found guilty, they're going to have to make these workers whole, which could be significant because it did take a long time for this case to move forward because things are so slow.
Even if I was on an email system that didn't have access, I wouldn't put stuff like that in there. I mean, because as Kash Patel has shown, anyone can get hacked.
Yeah, true.
You just had I think it's the MNPL conference this year, which is sort of your nonpartisan political arm of the union. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how that relates to the union activities and what the goals are currently in this in this environment coming up in the midterms this year, what the union thinks of its role, what it's pushing for in terms of legislation, and support?
Yeah, so by law, unions can't contribute dues money to political causes. So just about every union has a PAC. So our PAC is the Machinist Non-Partisan League, which is our PAC. So members can contribute to it voluntarily. So like if you're a member of the union, you can give $5 a month to MMPL. There's an endorsement process to endorse politicians. and basically be a part of the political process. Um, we have that on the national level. Also, like we are very decentralized. So depending on like where you are in the country, there may be different political issues. Um, I think one of the biggest issues right now is just democracy, right? Corruption, democracy, just protecting that. And then, it's nonpartisan because we don't want anyone to take us for granted. Like we don't automatically endorse you because you belong to one party or another. Like you need to come, right? And we need to see what your voting record is. You need to answer questions, and then we'll give a score. And we just release that to our members. Here's the scores, right? Here's where they are on this issue. Here's where they are on this issue. Do they support passing the PRO Act, right? And then members vote who to endorse. It wasn't that long ago where we had a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House, and card
Praise
check
God.
neutrality didn't get passed. Like we did not
Yeah.
get any meaningful legislation on labor, and so I think a lot of us look at that and say like we are not willing to let that happen again, and so yeah, it's about moving politics, and politics affects everything that we do, whether you're in the private sector, public sector. Our political director, if you've ever seen him, one of his favorite sayings is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And it couldn't be truer. And so we don't want to be on the menu. We want to be at the table. And a lot of, what we're looking at in the industries that we organize is, how do we bring more funding to an industry, right? If it's related to state budgets or municipal budgets, how do we pass legislation that protects worker safety in that industry? So there's always something legislative that affects you no matter what you do. And I think people are waking up to that. Obviously, we're in a drastic point. But yeah, there's really no issue too small, no issue too big, really.
The previous administration obviously was better to unions, but it would be hard not to be than the current situation. Still, they sold out the railroad workers. I mean, so it's never,
Right.
it's never total ally.
Yeah. Yeah, no one's going to do it for you, right? Even, what you all are working on is an example of, none of these things work in isolation, right? There's not much I can do as an individual that's going to, shift things. But as more and more people coordinate and focus their energy towards a specific goal, then that's how we have power. And it's really the only power we have. It's the best power we have. Um, and like it has the power to change things. Like it may sound a little altruistic, but it really is, we're not going to shoot our way out of, a situation. We're not going to shoot our way to better wages. It's really through just harnessing our collective power that we can make these things happen. And, history proves it time and time again. Like it's really the most effective way to move the needle.
I believe that in the fiber of my being. I believe, and I welcome anyone into the coalition. Just join us. We feel that all issues ultimately interact and intersect. And two is the bigger the coalition, and there's 99% of us. So let's keep building. Like your union, it's just, it just is bigger and more diverse. Were some of your people affected by Doge?
Oh yeah, yeah. We were in DC during the height of that. We represent federal workers as well, and even with the shutdowns, people who work directly for the government get back pay. People who are contractors don't get back pay after a shutdown. Right? So that's just
Mm.
another legislative issue, like making sure contractors get back pay. Yeah, like it's hard to find an industry that we're not in. We believe every worker deserves a contract, and if they want representation, we'll be there for them.
Yeah, and you have quite a history, it looks like, of being pretty aggressive as a union, which is nice. It looks like you've done quite a few strikes, including in the past several years that have been successful. How does the union go about preparing people for strikes? And are there any lessons and thoughts to be learned? There's a lot of people sort of calling, and I think the auto workers union potentially is calling for in a few years an attempt to sort of organize for
Right.
larger scale, more general strikes. How does your union go about preparing for successful strikes, and what sort of lessons can we learn from there, in terms of what would be needed to sort of expand that out to a larger, to something larger.
Yeah, so I think to Barry's point, the larger the coalition, the better, right? And so one thing you learn in union organizing very quickly is you can't just get the people who agree with you and then you're done. Like every vote counts. You need to get the people who don't agree with you, or you need to engage the people who don't agree with you, um, or the people who may, be sympathetic, but for other reasons. Like you need to have these conversations with everybody. And so the workplace is just kind of like a little microcosm of like the country or the world. Like no one is expendable. Like everyone is important in these struggles. I would say as far as strike preparation, like you need to have the numbers. With our union, you need a 2/3 majority before you can have a strike authorization. Um, we always do power analysis, right? Where is our leverage? Who do we have as supporters and allies? Who's movable in this picture? Who isn't movable? So where do we focus? You really do have to do the analysis and have a plan. And also a plan of escalation, a plan for communications, a plan for outreach to the community. Um, you know, strikes are kind of, it's a tool and can be a very effective tool. And at the right place and the right time, you want to use it. It's always a tool of last resort because it's very painful for people. But at the same time, I think a lot of members of ours make the calculation that I would rather deal with the short-term pain than for the long-term pain if we don't exercise our power and our rights to hold on to what we have. Kind of that like slow march to things falling apart. So I think it's anytime you see somebody on strike, it's a good reminder of someone willing to sacrifice in the short term, right, for a long-term game, and not just for themselves, but like for the next generation. And so, we have some places that have a strong culture and history of striking, even though no one there may have been on strike in 20 years. They know about the strike in 1980, or they know about the strike that happened, 15 years ago, and then like what that produced and what they got. So I think even just education around this stuff is really important because it comes down to the culture. Like you can't just build that overnight. It does take engagement with the membership. And I suspect, maybe in the next few years, if we move to like a better place in this country, we'll hopefully memorialize some of these things that we've learned that maybe people have forgotten because we've been, I think a large portion of our society has been unaffected by what's been happening, and now people are being affected. And maybe that will change kind of perceptions of what our responsibilities are.
And there's encroachment on some union gains, in terms of child labor, in terms of safety and wages. So all these important and hard fought wins are being slowly pushed.
Anything one can be taken away at any time. Nothing's permanent, right? So we all have a responsibility to keep pushing on this stuff, including democracy. Like that can be taken away too.
And democracy is very fragile, apparently.
Yeah.
Your union president was at a No Kings.
Yeah, down in Georgia. I believe were they? I think they were in Atlanta. No, Savannah. They were in Savannah.
Savannah.
Yeah.
So
We do a lot of organizing in the South, which is also a place that traditionally has been hard to organize, but it's an area that we think is important because we need to just broaden out. Like no part of the country is expendable. Like we are like literally across the country. We're organizing in Texas, in Missouri, Deep South, Midwest, places like New York, but also places that, South Carolina that aren't traditionally union. People still deserve this stuff, still have these rights. And so we're focused on it.
As you organize in these different places, are similar types of sort of arguments and appeals, working and finding convincing, or how tailored sort of, and how disparate are the sort of reasons and ways that people find convincing for why one should join the union? Is that geographically at all, or, culturally sort of changed, or is it just run the sort of gamut no matter where you're going?
I think there's definitely similarities and differences. I'm pretty much in the Northeast, so I don't see a lot of the rest of the country in terms of organizing campaigns. I see it in different industries, like different industries have kind of their different talking points. Um, I think it all comes down to, it's a couple of things. Like one, yes, it's the culture, geography, but it's also just what's the structure of this workplace? A worker who works at Amazon or Starbucks is never going to meet the CEO of the company, right? And so that lends itself to a certain message. If you work at a car dealership, right? The owner's name is probably on the building. Maybe his dad gave it to him, right? And it's like an intergenerational thing, and it's theirs. It's their kingdom. Like, this is mine. How dare you try to organize? So, and that requires a different type of organizing. So I think the structure of the workplace and the person's relationship to the power of that workplace really does inform, at least my organizing, thinking about what are those personal relationships and how effectively can they be weaponized. Jeff Bezos cannot really weaponize his personal relationship with anybody who works in a warehouse. Like, that's a joke.
Hmm.
But so they use other means. If you work at a small place where it's a car dealership or even an architecture firm, the person's name is on the door, that personal relationship is a very powerful weapon. So again, like, the structure really informs some of that stuff.
I'm
Yeah,
just,
that's really,
this is so meaty and so important. We
Sorry,
obviously,
all my conversations are this way. Sorry about that.
I mean, we obviously believe in
yeah.
coalition building and bringing anyone in for, to work with us regardless. I mean, we have an economic protest, and we've talked to several union people, and I'm not a union lawyer, but a couple of people have said to us when they were about to go on strike that they can't say anything involving boycotts or anything about shopping. And but Chris Small said, he could say, well, don't shop on Tuesday, or don't use Prime, but he could not say don't shop at Amazon, even though Amazon had not recognized his union. So there are all these pitfalls and traps in place, and because it was so successful in the '60s when you had a strike and a boycott simultaneously. So anything to help the workers sort of being pulled out from under them. And I didn't know Jeff didn't go through to the warehouses. That was
Right. As like a robot version of himself that
Yeah,
can
yeah.
carry on.
and he
Yeah.
helps out,
Oh
I'm
man.
sure. I mean, he'll
Yeah.
take off his jacket and say, "Let me load this for you."
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not a lawyer either, so I don't know the specific rules or laws around, boycott stuff and labor action, but I assume if it's powerful, that's why it's
You're trying
illegal.
to stop it. Yeah.
Anytime we try to coordinate on stuff or even like secondary strikes and things like that, it's because it was effective and powerful. And I think like I think the Teamsters have been able to keep in their contracts that they don't cross picket lines. And like it it's like it's such a good example of solidarity because just knowing like, oh, if I have a picket line in front of my building, my deliveries aren't coming in because if a
Hmm.
Teamster sees that, they don't have to cross it. And I think, more of that stuff, like thinking um, beyond just our collective bargaining agreements, but thinking about how this stuff all interfaces. And to your point, beyond just um, unions, but the broader labor movement and then broader progressive organizing, whatever you want to call it, this stuff all intersects. And we really should be like, we should be using our power to amplify each other because it's exponential once we start doing that.
Oh,
Totally. And so one thought that I have had, recently, and just in terms of talking with you, is around. So I don't know that if you know, but back in 2008, speaking of having a moment and taking action at the right time for potentially sort of big effect. Right now, we have an illegal and offensive war going on in Iran, and I don't know if you remember, but back in 2008, dock workers actually organized to attempt to stop shipments in order to put pressure to start winding down the war, the occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, as you were saying, sort of doing power analysis, and that your union, or like at least members of your unions, work in the aerospace area, work in, large sort of portions. Has there been any sort of discussion in the union around trying to figure out how to leverage some of your workers' power, in order to put pressure on, because foreign policy is not something that's often very easy to sort of just for a general person to influence and exert pressure, but some of your union members do have some sort of choke points and leverage points, especially as the United States is, for instance, going to be trying to restock all of these weaponry that they've been expending here. And the consequences of this sort of escalating spiral could be quite dire. Is there any discussion around sort of in that larger solidarity around trying to take action, or what could be done, if anything?
Yeah, specifically, I don't know, but I think it goes back to education. So like if you can get someone to see that, uh, by the government doing these things, in the long run, it's taking away from your children's education, from the health of your neighborhood, of the health of our environment. Without that education, so that the person can like truly understand and internalize why that's the right thing to do, it's never going to happen, right? The union can't say, hey, you all do this, right? Like it's got to come from the membership. It's got to be something that the membership organizes and wants to do. So I think the biggest struggle for any union, and what our union tries to put a lot of focus on, is just education of membership around these issues and like how they intersect. And we have a lot of work to do on that. Like there's a lot of work we have to do on that. And even just with like politics in the last few years, it's gotten so divisive, that even just trying to like open that door and have the conversations is like, that's where we're at. Like we're just trying to have conversations of, forget about which party you're a part of. Let's look at the issues and who do these people support. So it's a long road. Like ideally, you get there, and I think in some other countries they've gotten there. The Italian dock workers have done some really good stuff, from the occupation of Palestine. But yeah, it all starts with education, and there's so much that this union, other unions have to do to just get people there. Yeah.
The education piece is so important. It reminds me of, as well, I heard that back in the 20s and 30s, a century ago, when unions were organizing, that, on the shop floor, that the workers would employ people to read to them the daily sort of news. And then they would have, discussions around this to try to keep everyone sort of informed. And that there were a lot of sort of parallel structures that the unions would create, around sort of social life and various other things that sort of helped it expand in solidarity outside to sort of a full human, sort of wraparound
Yeah.
services. Are there any efforts to sort of re-expand the sort of purview of unions out to sort of those more social aspects, to create sort of that, when you see people as full humans that you're interacting with, the more sort of touch points, the more solidarity you hopefully create?
Yeah, I think it's different for every union. I know our union does a lot of community service stuff, and that's really just like each local at its own level is looking at its community and being like, okay, like what can we do for the community? And it's part of like the ethos of this union is that like every local has some kind of community service effort that they do nationally. We have like a nonprofit charity, Guide Dogs, which trains dogs for visually impaired people, people with PTSD, autistic children. And so, yeah, finding any ways you can to reach out to the community and get involved is really important. And the thing I always think back to is, I used to live in Boston for a long time, and once a year you would see the firemen out on the street with the boot collecting money for leukemia, I think it was.
Hmm.
And it's a great thing to do. But also, when they were having their contract fight with the mayor, people were thinking, oh, like firefighters, like they're out there, they're doing good stuff for the community. Like we should be there for them. So I think,
Hmm.
as unions, we need to look at, again, beyond just our collective bargaining agreements, but like, where's our standing in this community? How are we helping out? If we have resources, how are we helping spread that to the rest of the community? Because we may need their help, right? If next time we're on strike, we're going to need them to put pressure on these companies and politicians. So again, it all intersects. And you know, we're so decentralized, and I think in some ways that presents challenges, but in other ways, we have like really unique ways of doing that stuff. So it could be like, you know, golfing in one place. It could be, you know, a cornhole tournament someplace else. It could be, you know, I forget the name of it, but like basically getting companies in the area to sponsor a Christmas tree, and you have a room with like 10 Christmas trees, and then people who, you know, don't have money for Christmas presents can come and get presents for their kids. Like it's different everywhere. But I think all those things add up, and it's truly important.
Well, we want to thank you for not only telling us specifics, but really I feel the micro and the macro, which is coalition building, unions uniting, coming together, because ultimately we all have a stake in this, and we all can help each other. And you know, it's very instructive that, you know, we are telling there's so many pieces to the puzzle, and so many, and sort of a power imbalance, not to mention money and political contributions. I mean, so it was so illuminating, and to talk to you. And we are a huge supporter of unions, a huge supporter of workers. And yeah, and we can have a capitalistic society without a predatory capitalism, without
Right.
the only focus being on profit, but being on literally the entire picture: the workers, the customers, the country, the planet, everything. So we thank you so much for taking the time and joining us and chatting with us. Until next time, don't shop on Tuesday. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Good talking to you both.
Thanks so much.